The Watcher on the Hill. Jack and Emily had dreamed of escaping the endless noise and stress of city life. Their goal was simple: find a peaceful, secluded home where they could start a family and rediscover the beauty of nature. When they stumbled upon a quaint, two-story house at the base of a rolling hill, it felt like destiny. The real estate agent's cheerful demeanor and the shockingly low price made it an easy decision. The house had been on the market for years, which seemed odd, but they chalked it up to the remote location. Their first week was idyllic. The sound of wind brushing through the trees and the sight of deer grazing nearby melted away their urban anxieties. The hill behind their house became their favorite spot for evening walks, offering breathtaking sunsets and a quiet only found miles from civilization. But it wasn't long before the hill became more than just scenery. It became a source of unease. It started innocently enough. On their fourth evening, while enjoying a glass of wine on the back porch, Emily spotted something at the crest of the hill. A figure stood silhouetted against the fiery orange sky, motionless. "Jack, do you see that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack squinted. "Probably a hiker or a hunter. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. The figure stayed there for hours, unmoving, as the sun disappeared and darkness enveloped the countryside. Even under the dim light of the moon, it was clear the figure H. The next day, Jack decided to investigate. With a flashlight in hand, he climbed the hill. The trek wasn't difficult, but the silence was unnerving. He reached the summit, only to find nothing. No footprints, no trampled grass, nothing to suggest anyone had been there. When he returned, Emily met him at the door, holding her phone. "Jack, look at this," she said, her voice trembling. She showed him a photo she'd taken earlier of the hill. The figure was clearer in the image, its eyes glowed faintly, and its edges were blurred as if it wasn't entirely solid. "It's probably just a camera glitch," Jack reasoned, though he didn't believe his own words. That night, the sounds began. At first, it was faint, a distant whispering that could easily be mistaken for the wind. But as the hours passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Jack and Emily locked their bedroom door, but it didn't stop the noises. Footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was exploring their home. The next morning, they discovered deep scratches along the walls, starting in the living room and leading up to their bedroom door. "I think we should leave," Emily said, her voice quivering. "Leave? Over some scratches and noises? It's an old house, Em." "It's probably just animals," Jack replied, though he couldn't shake the pit forming in his stomach. The following evening, Emily refused to go outside, but Jack couldn't let the hill's mystery go. He set up a pair of binoculars on the porch and waited. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the figure reappeared. This time, it was closer, halfway down the hill. Jack's blood ran cold. He stayed outside, watching, until midnight. When he finally looked through the binoculars again, the figure was gone. Inside, Emily was pale. "It's in the house," she whispered. "What?" "I heard it. I heard it walking around while you were outside." "Jack, it's not safe here." Jack grabbed a bat from the closet and searched the house, room by room. But again, he found nothing. The unease between them grew unbearable. The next day, Jack contacted the real estate agent. "Has anyone mentioned anything strange about the house or the hill behind it?" he asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the agent said, "I don't know much, but the previous owners left in a hurry. They said the place didn't feel right." I didn't press for details. That night, the figure was even closer. It stood at the bottom of the hill, just a few yards from their backyard. Jack and Emily decided to call the police. When the officer arrived, the figure was gone. "I'll do a sweep of the area," he offered. Jack watched from the window as the officer climbed the hill, flashlight in hand. When he reached the top, the beam of light flickered and went out. Moments later, the officer's scream echoed through the night. Jack ran outside, shouting for the man, but he was gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, just silence. Emily begged Jack to leave immediately, but he insisted they wait until morning. That decision proved to be a mistake. At 3 a.m., they woke to the sound of their front door creaking open. Jack grabbed the bat, but before he could leave the bedroom, their door slammed shut. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling their ears with unintelligible words. The temperature in the room plummeted, and the air became heavy. The door opened slowly, revealing the figure from the hill. It was taller than any human, its limbs impossibly long and its glowing eyes fixed on them. Its body shimmered as if it were caught between two realities. Jack swung the bat, but it passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. Emily screamed as the creature lunged forward, its gnarled hands reaching for them. In a final act of desperation, Jack grabbed Emily's hand, and they fled the house. As they ran, they heard the creature's guttural growl echoing behind them. They never returned to the house. Weeks later, they learned from the real estate agent that the property had been a site of strange occurrences for decades. Every family who lived there reported the same figure on the hill, and none stayed longer than a year. Jack and Emily moved back to the city, but the nightmares followed them. And every so often, when they passed a hill at sunset, they swore they could see the figure, watching the shadows of Silent Creek. Silent Creek was a small town nestled deep in the heart of Maine. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a peaceful, almost sleepy pace. Yet, there was one spot in town that even the bravest avoided, the old Holloway house. Perched on a hill overlooking the town, the mansion had been abandoned for decades, its dark windows like empty eyes staring down at the people below. Stories about the Holloway house varied, but they all shared a common thread: shadows. People claimed they'd seen shadowy figures moving inside the house, even though no one had lived there since the Holloway family disappeared 50 years ago. Some said the shadows whispered to them, calling their names in the dead of night. It all began on a cold October night when a group of teenagers decided to test the legend. Jason, a headstrong 17-year-old, had recently moved to Silent Creek and didn't believe in ghosts. His friends, Emma, Mike, and Rachel, were skeptical too but couldn't resist the thrill of exploring the infamous house. They made their way to the mansion under the cover of darkness, armed with flashlights and their phones for recording. The front door creaked open with an eerie groan, and the group stepped inside. The air was heavy, as though the house itself were alive, watching them. "Do you hear that?" Emma whispered. The others paused, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing. But then, faintly, came a sound like the rustling of fabric, or was it footsteps? Jason laughed nervously. "Come on, it's just the wind," he said, leading the way deeper into the house. The group wandered through the dusty rooms, finding nothing but broken furniture and cobwebs. In the dining room, however, they discovered something chilling. The long table was set with plates and silverware, as though the Holloways had just stepped out for a moment. The air grew colder, and their breath came out in visible puffs. "Okay, this is officially creepy," Mike muttered. Suddenly, Rachel screamed. They all turned to see her staring at a mirror on the wall. In the reflection, there were 5 figures instead of 4. A tall, shadowy figure stood just behind Jason, its featureless face somehow watching them. The group spun around, but the figure was gone. Jason's bravado faltered. "Let's keep moving," he said, his voice tight. They decided to check the basement, where the most frightening stories about the house originated. The stairs creaked ominously under their weight, and the flashlight beams danced across the damp, stone walls. The basement smelled of mildew and something metallic, like blood. At the far end of the room stood an old wooden chest. Despite their fear, curiosity got the better of them. Jason opened the chest, revealing a collection of dusty, yellowed papers. The pages were filled with strange symbols and what looked like names, written over and over. "What is this?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the basement door slammed shut. Their flashlights flickered, and a low, guttural voice filled the air. "You shouldn't have come." Panic set in as the shadows began to move. They seeped out of the walls like living smoke, taking on humanoid shapes. One by one, the flashlights died, plunging the room into darkness. The teens could feel the shadows brushing against their skin, cold and suffocating. Jason shouted, "Run!" But there was nowhere to go. The shadows closed in, their whispers growing louder. "Stay with us!" Emma screamed as one of the shadows wrapped itself around her arm, pulling her toward the chest. Jason grabbed her other arm, pulling with all his strength. The shadows hissed, and Emma was freed, but the whispering didn't stop. In a desperate bid to escape, Jason remembered the matches in his pocket. He struck one, and the tiny flame seemed to hold the shadows at bay. "Light!" he shouted. "They hate the light." The group scrambled to find anything flammable. Mike found an old lantern, and Jason lit it. The room was bathed in a dim, flickering glow, and the shadows retreated, hissing angrily. Taking the lantern, they rushed up the stairs and burst through the front door into the cold night air. The teens didn't stop running until they were back in town. They told the police about their experience, but no one believed them. When they returned to the house the next day with their parents, they found it empty. The basement chest was gone, and there was no sign of the shadows. Jason, however, knew the truth. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard a familiar rustling sound. Turning to look, he saw a shadowy figure standing in the corner of his room. "You can't escape," it whispered. The Holloway house wasn't cursed, it was a gateway. And once you crossed its threshold, the shadows would follow you, though nobody knew why. In hindsight, maybe that was the first sign something was off. When Mia purchased the antique mirror at an estate sale, it seemed like a stroke of luck. It was tall, ornate, and etched with floral patterns that looked like they were from another century. The seller was almost too eager to let it go, insisting on a price far below its apparent value. "It's beautiful," Mia murmured, running her fingers over the intricate carvings. "You'll want to cover it at night," the seller said abruptly, his smile fading. "And, never stand in front of it too long." Mia chuckled nervously, thinking it was a strange joke. She shrugged off the unease and brought the mirror home to her downtown apartment. The first night, everything seemed fine. Mia positioned the mirror in her bedroom, directly opposite her bed. She admired her reflection before falling asleep, feeling proud of her find. But in the early hours, something woke her. She wasn't sure what it was, a faint sound, maybe? A creak? She sat up, her eyes drawn to the mirror. Her reflection wasn't moving. At first, she thought she was imagining it. She waved her hand, and her reflection followed, albeit a fraction of a second too late. The delay was almost imperceptible, but it was there. "Just tired," she muttered, forcing herself to look away. The next few days were uneventful, though Mia began to notice strange things. At times, the mirror seemed off. She couldn't explain it, but the room reflected in the glass felt subtly wrong, as if the angles didn't align quite the same way. Worse, she started catching glimpses of movement in the mirror when she wasn't moving. One evening, while brushing her hair, she noticed something chilling. Her reflection was smiling. Mia wasn't. She froze, her hand mid-stroke, and watched as the grin widened, showing teeth that didn't look like hers. Just stressed, imagining things. But sleep didn't come easily. Around 3 a.m., she woke to a soft rustling noise. The sheet was on the floor. Heart pounding, she turned on the light and stared at the uncovered mirror. Her reflection stared back, calm and unbothered. But something was wrong with the room in the glass. It wasn't her apartment anymore. The walls were darker, the furniture different. And behind her reflection, something moved. Mia spun around, but there was nothing there. She decided to get rid of the mirror the next day. She called a friend, Dan, to help her carry it out. "You sure about this? It's a nice piece," Dan said as they loaded it into his truck. "I just don't want it anymore," Mia replied. Dan offered to take it off her hands, but she insisted on leaving it at a thrift shop across town. As they drove away, Mia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. But that night, as she lay in bed, she felt it again, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She bolted upright and gasped. The mirror was back. It stood in its usual place, uncovered, as if it had never left. "No," she whispered, backing into the corner of her room. Her reflection didn't follow. It stood still, staring at her with a neutral expression. Slowly, it began to move on its own, stepping closer to the glass. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. Mia screamed as the reflection placed its hand on the inside of the mirror, pressing against the glass as though it were a thin membrane. A crack appeared where its hand touched. Mia ran. She didn't stop until she was outside, barefoot and trembling in the cold night air. She never returned to her apartment. Weeks later, her building manager called, asking if she'd left anything behind. "There's a mirror in your unit. It's too heavy to move on my own," he said. Mia hung up and blocked the number. The mirror still stands in her old apartment, waiting for its next owner.